कथितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम्।
Om Asato ma Satkamaya Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amrutam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Last week we saw the cosmic vision that was given to Arjuna by Sri Krishna. In Sanskrit, the word that is used is Vishwarupa Darshana. Vishwarupa is this cosmic form. We saw that after giving teachings about the nature of the self, the cosmic processes of the world, the yajna, the path of karma yoga, all of those things were resolving many of Arjuna's doubts, answering many of his questions, but he craved for something more tangible. And when Krishna determined that it was time for Arjuna to have that vision, he granted it as an act of grace. We might see something like that happening in our own lives as well. As we take up spiritual life seriously, start reading books, listening to lectures, reflecting, having conversations with our friends, many of our doubts will get resolved, questions will get answered, some new questions will arise, some new doubts will arise. A time will come in the lives of every one of us when merely getting our answers to the questions that we have, or merely solving the doubts that we have, great as that experience is, will not be fully satisfying, because much of it remains at the level of the intellect. Much of it also remains at the level of feelings. But all of us, we need something deeper than merely the intellectual or the emotional level. And that is when we crave to have the actual experience of the divine in some form. And that's why, as spiritual seekers, as students of the Gita, if we have our own devotional practice, we can ask that question to ourselves, that through all of our readings, through our daily japa and meditation, when I sit for my prayer, when I sit for my meditation, do I sit with the hope, do I sit with the expectation that today I will see my Ishta, my chosen deity, in my heart? Or do I just sit with the idea, oh, this is a part of my discipline, that's something I'm doing with faith, with devotion every day, and just like I do every day, I have to start trying to visualize, trying to imagine the presence of God in my heart. Some days are better than others. Some days I am able to hold my attention better. Some days I am not able to do it. Is that how it is going to be all through my life? Or will there ever be a time when, as I sit in prayer and in meditation, that rather than me struggling to see the divine in my heart, through the grace of God, that vision will be revealed to me, that I will have a more tangible, more concrete form that'll appear here, which will not merely be an answer to some question, which will not merely be satisfaction of some feeling, but an actual perception of the divine. That'll happen. But the question that we can ask ourselves is, do I really want it? Am I ready for it? Am I not, again, being ready? We all might be tempted to say, well, I'm ready for it. It's not that. It's not just saying that I'm ready for it. But every time I sit in prayer or meditation, do I sit with the expectation, with the hope that this will be the day, this will be the time I'm going to see? And not getting disappointed if this is not the day, this is not the time. Sri Ramakrishna gives the example of a person who is gone fishing. Now, clearly, those who have done fishing know that a lot of patience is needed. Some days you might have to sit for hours and maybe you may not catch any fish. Some days you may sit and a lot of fish will gather. You never know. But you have to be alert. Because if you are not alert, then sometimes, even if there is a chance of some fish coming, and if you're not alert, you might miss that. Do I have that kind of a hope, that kind of an expectation, that kind of an alertness, that even when I'm struggling in my practice of meditation, to know that any moment the divine will appear here? In the stories of Krishna, in the Bhagavata also we read, when all these gopis and the friends of Krishna, both Gopas and Gopis as they are called, while they were waiting and Krishna hadn't arrived yet, and then maybe they just hear some sound, they just hear wind blowing and the leaves of the tree moving. But any sound, they immediately look to see, or maybe Krishna is coming, Krishna is arriving. Sometime you might see how alert dogs are. Any little sound, they'll quickly look here, there. Are we alert to that extent? That you see, it's like this. We might have a certain expectation that this is how the divine is going to appear to me. But it is better not to have any preconceived idea about, oh, this is exactly how it is going to happen. Because if we have a predetermined idea of how a vision is going to occur, we might miss the presence of the divine when it does occur, if it happens in a completely different way, in a completely unexpected way. So it's like having an expectation, but not necessarily how that expectation is going to be fulfilled. And you see that in the case of Arjuna as well. So he prayed to Krishna to show himself, to show that Ishvara form. And we don't know. We really don't know whether Arjuna was expecting some form. Only Arjuna knows what he was expecting really. But he asked. Now, whatever expectations Arjuna may or may not have had, what we see in the Gita is that Krishna showed Arjuna not necessarily what Arjuna wanted to see, but what Arjuna needed to see, what was necessary for him at that stage. So whenever we will get an experience in our own lives, it may not always be in the way we wanted it. It may not always be exactly what we wanted. But when it comes, it'll be something that we needed it. It'll come in a form, come in a manner that is best for us at that stage in life. So that is the attitude of a spiritual seeker. That I want the Lord to come. I might have my own ideas about how and when and which form the Lord will come. But when the Lord does come, it'll be not on my terms. It'll be not according to my calendar. It'll be not according to my specifications. It's like sometimes when you order takeout food. Now usually you expect, if you have ordered something, that's what they're going to deliver. But they mess up. Sometimes they do. They're human beings. The system isn't perfect. And so sometimes you order it at one time, it may come a little late, or seldom early, but usually late. Sometimes they may not deliver in the right way. Sometimes the menu may not be right. So you are expecting the food, you are expecting in a certain way, but they are going to deliver what they are going to deliver. Now, I know this is not a very perfect analogy, but the idea is this: we have an expectation of God coming in our lives. But in which form and in what way God will come, that's entirely in God's hands. And we saw in Arjuna's case last Sunday when we studied the verses in which that vision was bestowed to Arjuna, we saw that it came in a way, I doubt Arjuna really expected to see the divine form in the way it was shown. Not just Arjuna, really. I would mostly imagine any of us, when we say, oh Lord, please, if at all, I'm sure there are not many people saying that, but whenever we say, oh, show yourself to me, I think most of us are wanting kind of a benign, kind, loving, affectionate form of the divine coming. But that's not what came for Arjuna. It was divine, it was wonderful. I mean, it was no doubt, it must have been extremely powerful, extremely uplifting. But at the same time, it was also very fierce. And so we saw through those descriptions, and those of you who have read through these verses in 11th chapter know exactly a pretty good description of what Arjuna saw. We also saw that Krishna makes it clear that you cannot see me through these eyes, that you need to be given divine eyes, divya chakshu. Something that we find an echo of that in Sri Ramakrishna's conversations as well, when he says that as we advance in spiritual life, Sri Ramakrishna puts it this way: we develop a different set of senses. So there is this, now we have the sense of seeing, the ability to see. That's how I'm able to see, that's how you are able to see. But there is a separate sense of seeing, which can see not this material reality, but a reality which is much finer, much more sukshma. It's more subtle. It's a different plane altogether. So in order to see the form of the divine, I need to cultivate eyes that can capture that form. In order to hear the voice of the divine, in order to hear the sound of Krishna's flute, in order to hear the voice of the Holy Mother. These ears may not be enough. We need a separate mystical ears. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna meant. Now, it really doesn't, don't think it, sometimes they do show but 3 eyes, and but that's kind of a very oversimplified way of signifying that there is some superhuman powers are involved there. So many of the Hindu deities have 4 hands, 8 hands, and 16 hands. The idea is it's beyond the human level. It is something that transcends our human level. That's the idea. So only when this self-transcendence occurs. Now, self-transcendence means here that as a human being, there are a lot of things I can do. But there are a lot of things I cannot do as well. Now, what I can do is circumscribed by whatever abilities my senses have. Both the senses of knowledge and the senses of action. They are called Jnanendriya, sense of knowledge, Jnana Indriya, Jnanendriya, senses of knowledge, and Karmendriya, senses of action. So, our ability to do anything in this world is directly related to the ability of our senses. Now, the senses do not have infinite abilities. No, because they are limited, finite, material entities, and they have powers, but their powers are limited. And these powers are not uniform, we know that. What, for instance, cats can see in darkness, now we can't. There is only a certain range within of frequencies within which my eyes can see. There is only certain range of frequencies among the sound frequencies that my ears can hear. So anything above or below that range, I won't be able to see or I won't be able to hear. They say that a dog's sense of smell is several thousand times more than the human sense of smell. So we know that the senses do not have infinite capacity, and neither do all living creatures have the same ability. But one thing we know, that we can do only as much as our senses will allow us to do. And because the divine transcends the senses, the divine cannot be grasped, cannot be understood, cannot be known through the mind. The senses cannot see it, the senses cannot touch it, and so on. Which is why we need a separate set of senses. There's kind of a metaphorical use of saying that we need to transcend our present human limitations in order to see the divine. And the divine that Krishna showed to Arjuna at that moment, what Arjuna needed, as we saw earlier, was that aspect of the divine which absorbs the entire created universe. We saw that there are primarily three cosmic functions. One is when this visible universe appears, is projected. That's the Srishti. The second is after the universe appears, it is sustained, it is maintained, it thrives, it moves, it lives, it nourishes. So that part is called Sthiti. And then the third cosmic reality is that after a while, this entire created universe, again, there is a dissolution or absorption back into the source. Sometimes they just call it destruction because things as they appear now no longer appear in that way. So there are these three ways: Srishti, Sthiti, Pralaya. Being, sustaining, and then returning to non-being. And then we saw that everything is cyclical. So it's not a one-time event. So things appear, get projected, stay, go. After a while, they appear again, remain, go. Exactly like the day begins when the sun rises, you have light, then the light remains for a while, in the evening, there's darkness again. But then it's not darkness forever. Next day the sun rises again, you have light again and darkness again. So most things that happen in nature have this cyclical order of things. You see the cycle of seasons, the day and night, and so on. So that we can look and see that things, if one Swami Vivekananda points out something that is obvious, but something that we don't remember always, that if something can happen once, the scientific approach would require of us to say, well, if it can happen once, it can happen again. Who is to say something will happen only once and not anymore? That seems more a dogmatic statement. So the Gita way of thinking is exactly in the same way, that the things appear, go and come. So it's a continuous, it's a circle. So what Arjuna saw was this destructive, the third aspect of the cosmic function, because the setting of the Gita itself is a setting of the battlefield. That's where people are going to die. That's where death is going to occur. That's why there was this initial resistance from Arjuna to fight the war, because death is not pretty, violence is bad, killing is not good. Krishna points out, and we mentioned this last time, if you see verse number 32, Kalosmi loka kshayakrit pravruddho, I am the mighty world-destroying time. These are very strong words. But think about the power of time. If we look at the people we have known in our lives, even in our own family, maybe our great-grandparents if we met them, or grandparents, oftentimes parents, we see that many of our earlier generations have disappeared. Time, with the march of time, people get older. All of us are getting older too. And those new, younger generation is coming up. So time marches on, along with time we are moving. And after some time, when the span of human life ends, again, not the same for every person, it's like there is this time waiting here, and then one by one, people disappear into the time. That is what is meant by saying this, all devouring the world. Because people from seemingly existing apparently disappear into non-existence. Now, it's not really non-existence, we know that, but we are able to see them, and then we are no longer able to see them in the form that we were used to, because the body is perishable. So as Arjuna is seeing this form and being awed by it, being overwhelmed by it, being a little bit terrified by it as well. So it's kind of a mixture of emotions. But among the things that he says, look at verse number 38. Let me read the verse. Tvamadideva purushah puranaha tvamasya vishwasya param nidhanam vetasi vedyam cha parancha dhama tvaya tatam vishwamananta rupa. Thou art the primal Deva, the ancient Purusha. Thou art the supreme refuge of this universe. Thou art the knower and the one thing to be known. Thou art the supreme goal. By thee is the universe pervaded, O boundless form. the different ways of affirming that you are the only reality. It's a fascinating thing, the experiencing the form. And even when Arjuna is saying these things, there is an absence of ego there. So it's like this. Well, the fact that Arjuna is seeing it and expressing his feelings, describing what he's seeing, just seems like there is a duality. Well, here is just Arjuna who is seeing the cosmic form. But what he's really saying is that you are the only being. You are the only thing to be known. You are the only knower. So the knower is the only, the Lord is the knower, and in the Lord is the known. There are many different ways. By you is this universe pervaded. What is really being said is you are the only one that really exists. So sometimes when we make these very facile distinctions between Dvaita and Advaita, we need to recognize, pay an attention to a verse like this. Because oftentimes people seem to think that Advaita, non-duality, means all that I need to say is, I am Brahman. No forms, no nothing. And that's true. That is one way non-dualistic practices have occurred. What is not often recognized, that even in a vision like this, when there is a form involved, there is someone who is seeing that form, there is someone who is describing their feelings, their emotions. But what they are actually experiencing at that moment is not that, oh, here I am describing how I'm seeing you. This I is completely gone. So even for a bhakta, even for a devotee, there will be moments when only the divine remains in the field of awareness. A non-duality is reached without necessarily affirming it. A bhakta may not go on saying, oh, everything is one. That's not the language a devotee uses. A devotee will always say, I am the servant of the Lord. I am a child of the Lord. Lord is everything. That's the language a devotee will use. But even in a bhakta's spiritual journey, there will be moments when this I completely disappears and only the Lord remains. And if only the Lord remains and the I is absent, in what way is that different than from the mind or the perception of someone on the path of knowledge for whom all external forms have disappeared, only the self remains? In either case, only one has remained. In someone who follows a path of looking upon the reality as beyond form and beyond qualities, will simply refer to it in the student of the Gita, the Upanishads, as the Atman or Brahman. A bhakta will see it in the form of Krishna or Shiva. Well, Shivaratri is coming up this week. Shiva or Vishnu or Ramakrishna or Buddha or Jesus. But when they have an experience, whether it's of this self or of this divine, there will be moments when everything will disappear and only one will remain. So this non-dual experience can come through either of those paths. And that's why I said we have to be careful to not to use this term Dvaita and Advaita in a very simplistic terms. Because the experience, to think about it this way. In some sense, and I know this is going to sound funny, but in some sense, every experience is non-dualistic. Even a materialistic experience is non-dualistic. Think about it this way. When you are drinking coffee, and I know people do multitasking, they're drinking coffee, they're listening to news, they're watching television, and we say, well, that's clearly very dualistic thing happening. But if you're just sitting there with coffee and truly enjoying that coffee, and there's nothing going on, you are just relishing that coffee. That moment when you're that freshly roasted and ground coffee, that is now there on the tip of your tongue, and you're just relishing it. So that moment when you have that taste of coffee in your mouth, that is a very non-dualistic thing, because you will be able to enjoy your coffee to the fullest only when you are not thinking of anything else at that moment. Otherwise, simultaneously you're doing a bunch of other things, you're still drinking coffee, you won't be able to enjoy it as much. So if you want to enjoy it fully, you have to become one with that coffee experience to some extent. And that's true for everything. Even the studies that a student does, even the cooking that you do, even the work that you do at your workplace, if you become one with your work, with whatever activity I'm engaged in, no matter how important it is or how unimportant it is, if I can become one with it for that moment, for that time, the quality of my work, the quality of my experience will become 1,000-fold better. Even when we brush our teeth, if we just pay full attention as the brush moves over every tooth and every nook and corner of your mouth, if you're paying full attention, first, you will enjoy your brushing. It won't be a boring daily chore as some people think it is. And even better, the teeth will become cleaner. You'll just feel better afterwards. So that's the practice. And if we can begin by doing this with the small little things, like drinking a cup of tea or coffee, and make that a habit. So if I can do these little things of daily life with full attention, being one with that experience, then I'll be able to do even other things which I see as important, as major. And I'm not just talking about the work that we do at the workplace. Even the time that you spend with your family, with your friends, with your children. Sometimes you want to say, let me have a family time. Let me spend time with the family. But there are things that you're still thinking about that need to be done. Maybe some workplace tension or something else. Or maybe politics, or if you're interested in sports. You're thinking about some baseball game, but you also want to spend time with your children. It doesn't work. And I think sometimes children are very sensitive. They know exactly whether you are fully there or you're just kind of pretending to be there. But if I have made it a habit to be fully present in whatever thing I'm engaged in, to be fully present for the person in front of me, or be fully present for the work that I'm doing, to be fully present when I'm eating, to be fully present even when I'm sleeping, it will make a big difference. Even if you spend 5 minutes with the members of your family, but if you're fully there, they will enjoy your company more and you will enjoy their company more as well. So it works not just in in our workplace activities or our personal chores, but even in interpersonal relationships. So being fully there. So that's why I said every experience, even of our workaday world, is non-dualistic if I am fully present there at that moment. Now, if that is true of these things that are happening around us all the time, how much more true it is when we are doing our worship or when we are praying. The prayer will become so much more powerful, so much more enjoyable, so much more fun. If when I'm praying, I say, I'm not going to be thinking of anything else. My whole being is given to that act of prayer. And when that's done, you may want to even pray more. Japa, sometimes people ask, what is the minimum japa I should do? Which is fine. And well, minimum normally they say is 108. But that kind of a question sometimes amuses me because so far no one has ever asked me, or I have come across anyone asking anyone, like, what is the maximum japa I should do? That's not on people's mind at all. It's like, what is the minimum? And I think that even doing japa, if I'm able to give my full mind to it, if I become one with my japa, I will relish it so much that I would say, a little bit more, let me do some more. So, it's like some delicious food that's given. And sometimes when we were children and mom or dad says, only one cookie or only one. And if it's so delicious, you say, oh, can I have one more? Can I have one more, please? In the same way, if I've done my japa 108 times and I've enjoyed it so much that I don't want to get up, I don't want to stop. I don't say, well, that's minimum, why should I do more? No, it's not a chore. It's a completely voluntary activity. Nobody is holding me at gunpoint to say, do japa. It's something that I have chosen to do myself. And so why do I want to stop if I'm enjoying it? Why do I not want to do it more? That's the idea. So that's what we see here in this verse number 38. And then several other verses that will come in the Gita throughout also. That we see that even though the language is devotional, even though it seems like it's a dialogue between two people, but without using the language of non-duality, the experience is of non-duality. Look at verse number 40. Namah purastat atha prushtataste namostute sarvata eva sarva ananta virya mita vikramastvam sarvam samapnoshi tatosi sarvaha. Salutation to thee before and behind, salutation to thee on every side, O all. Thou infinite in power and infinite in prowess, pervadest all, wherefrom thou art all. Exactly the same way, that you are everything. You are behind, you are ahead, you are at the side, you are everywhere, and you are in everyone. And this language is not different at all from some of the Upanishads which say the Atman is behind, the Atman is in front, the Atman is everywhere. Exactly the same way. So it's amazing how the same experience can get expressed in a apparently dualistic context, and gets, experienced and expressed in what seems externally as a very non-dualistic thing. So we have to, going forward, it will be helpful whenever we use the word Dvaita and Advaita to not just think in compartmentalized way, because that's sometimes that modern ways of studying may force us to do. And that sometimes even students of Vedanta tend to do. Oh, dualism, Dvaita, Madhvacharya. Vishishta Dvaita, Ramanujacharya. Advaita, Shankaracharya. And then we have these kind of compartments, and then teachers connected with certain, and then we say, well, you are either this or that. It's good to recognize that the walls are porous to these three. In the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother and Swamiji, we see that they often see this as a progression. Now, we see that to some extent even in our all relationships, and especially, of course, the relationship that we have with God. That in the beginning, people are different. When we are beginning, I don't even know someone else. So there is this clear duality. And when we start our spiritual life again, well, I'm first thinking of God, I'm excited to know about God, and God does seem like a separate person. But then as I begin to read more, study more, think more, a kind of a relationship develops with the Lord. So God then is no longer some person totally disconnected from me. There is some kind of a relationship that can be forged through my feelings, my emotions, or it could be purely intellectual, but in some way I feel connected with the divine. And when that connection is established, at some point the two begin to come closer and closer and closer and closer, so until they come so close that it's difficult to distinguish one from the other. So it's possible to see this as a progression from dualism to non-dualism, with this intermediate stage, sometimes called as qualified non-dualism or Vishishta Advaita. Now, this way of describing it seems tilted in favor of non-dualism, because it just seems like, well, non-dualism is the highest. And so it feels as if this structure was designed by non-dualists. So it's like, well, okay, we are accommodating these others, but like this is the highest. And so the times in which we live, people are suspicious about everything. So it's just like, oh, these non-dualists want to put themselves on top, and that's why they have kind of created this way of thinking. But as we have seen, the fact is that the experience of the divine, God is one. God is not God of the dualists and God of the non-dualists and God of those who are in the middle, is not different. The ultimate reality is one, with which everyone agrees. There is no difference of opinion here, that the ultimate reality is one. Ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. It's a most ancient formulation in the Vedas, with nobody disagrees with that. What disagreement there is about how that divine appears to us. There is no disagreement about the experience of the divine either. So the experience that a dualist has, the experience that the non-dualist has, the experience that the qualified non-dualist has, may not be different at all. But when you come from that level of experience to expression, there's going to be difference. Even if all of us are given coffee brewed, not today I'm just keeping on saying coffee, although I'm not a very daily coffee drinker. So if we are all given a coffee brewed into the same pot, and so all of us have drunk that same coffee, and then we say, now describe it. I can guarantee you no two descriptions are going to be identical, although the experience was the same. And that is why the experience of God is the same, because God is the same. But the expression, how that experience gets described in words, in what language, with what symbols, what metaphors, will so much depend on the ability of the one who is describing to describe it. what language they're familiar with, what kind of a symbology they use, what kind of a culture they're, and the language and the images that we use are very cultural, very culture specific. And so it's possible to see that these great religious traditions that have come throughout history in different parts of the world, and the great illumined ones that have come in all of these different traditions in different parts of the world at different points in history, that it's possible that those whom we see as enlightened ones, that their experience was not necessarily different, but it's this expression of their experience has taken different forms. And so the differences that we see are in the expression, not in the experience itself. It's worth reflecting on. And the more we try to see it in this way, the differences in the world will not produce fear or suspicion or feelings of superiority or inferiority. There will be no need to condemn anyone. There will be no need to fight with anyone. It's just that, well, you are seeing things in one way, I'm seeing it in a different way. If we disagree, the disagreement is on the way we are describing it. The disagreement is not about God, because God is one. So this is one way of looking at it. Clearly, this is not the only way. And even when you describe it in this way, surely there will be people who find it, this way of thinking, problematic. There's not going to be any description which will not be contested, and which is good. People are different. People think differently. So there's never going to be any one way which will be universally be accepted. So what I try to present before you now is just one possible way when we try not to see these different, what gets called as systems of philosophy, as Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, Advaita, as some three schools, never agreeing, always in tension, always fighting with one another. That's not necessarily the way we need to look at them. Same is true with different religions, which, as I've said, could be just different expressions of that one truth, that one reality. So this will be one possible way Vedanta students can try to negotiate diversity. I'll just conclude by mentioning the Vedanta Pandit under whom I had a chance to study in Chennai many years ago. He did not much like, and he was a very orthodox scholar. He had never gone to school or college. He studied in a Vedic school. So as much as it is possible to remain untouched by modern systems of education, he was. And so I take his view as the kind of whatever we mean by traditional view. And again, the traditional view, that statement really doesn't mean much, because we arbitrarily decide at what time in history tradition kind of remains fixed and say, well, that is traditional, and everything after that arbitrary time period is non-traditional. But who decides which point in history will be traditional? So the word traditional is problematic in many ways. But I just wanted to mention one thing. So he did not so much like the use of the way say, well, this is Shankara's philosophy, or this is Ramanuja's philosophy. And so I remember in one day, so he was giving a class only to monastics. It was not like a general public class. And so he said, so when one amongst us mentioned, oh, this is according to Shankara, now this is according to Ramanuja, and that's how we tend to see in modern times. And so he said, no, it's not according to Shankara. That's according to the Upanishads. So he says, there is no such thing as Shankara's view or Ramanuja's view. That's what the Upanishads are saying. And so what he said was, when Shankara read the Upanishads, this is what he saw there. Maybe when Ramanuja read the same Upanishads, what he saw might be different. The way he expressed it may be different. But that is not Shankara's view, that is not Ramanuja's view. That is what the Upanishads are saying. So, again, this could be semantics, but to give you a taste about how some scholars have seen this negotiated these differences in philosophies or in religious traditions. So, a lot of different ideas and issues we got a chance to, I got a chance to air today. And if some of these ideas make you reflect and think, and if you have any comments or questions and thoughts, feel free to share it in the chat box, and then we can take a look at them after about 5 minutes. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Let's take a look at the questions. Is the Mahabharata epic a real fact from past? The recent findings at Sinauli are striking, etc. Many people do believe that Mahabharata is a record of history. There are many people who believe that Mahabharata is just a great piece of literature. So some people have raised doubt whether all of this really happened, and some people are adamant that it really happened. And then there are many others who say, what does it matter? One thing we have to remember when we study the Gita, that the wisdom in the Gita will not be affected, even if, let us assume, through some great research or whatever way, it was proved that there was never any person called Krishna. Krishna never existed, or the war of Kurukshetra never occurred. There was no battlefield, nothing. It was just imagination. And we might say, oh, then why should I study the Gita? That will not affect the authenticity of the Gita, because two things. One is that the Gita is authentic because it is in complete harmony with the wisdom of the Vedas. That it's the greatest summary, the most concise and accurate summary of Vedantic wisdom. And so long as it is that, its power will remain unchanged, whether or not any of the personalities mentioned in the Gita were a part of history or not. And the second reason is that people who have lived according to the Gita teachings, their lives have been transformed. They're people who have become enlightened by trying to learn from the Gita and then living according to it. So the enlightenment that they had, the wisdom that they got, the knowledge that they acquired, that is not imagination. The Mahabharata could be an imagination according to some, but the lives that have been transformed as a result of practicing the Gita, that transformation is not an imagination. So it really doesn't matter one way or the other. But believers, people who believe in tradition, traditionally it is believed that it is a historical thing. Since God is the only goal across all theistic philosophies, is it fair to conclude that God is the only thing to obtain and enjoy, while everything else is clearly outside and unnatural? Well, that's exactly what all these spiritual books say, that there is only one being, God, and the only being worth striving for, the only being worth investing our time and energy into. Next question. While doing japa, how do we get that tadatmyata, grace of Ishta or our practice? Tadatmyata means being one with the object of our meditation. I would think both. When the grace of the divine comes, as I said, the grace does not come according to our calendar. I mean, there is a view, of course, that the grace is always there. It's not something that comes and goes. That we have to make ourselves fit for that. In order to make ourselves fit to receive that grace, clearly self-effort and practice are necessary. But God's grace will come when at the time that is best for us. Although it's time that we are not going to get an email or a text message saying, tomorrow, 8 o'clock, the grace is coming. That will not happen. So it can come at most unexpected time, in a most unexpected way. And so we have to be alert always. Next question. Is the experience of a dualist, such as a vision of the goddess, the same as the vision of a non-dualist who sees everything as one? Now let me clarify. I'm not saying that every experience of everyone is exactly same. That is not what I said. What I did say is that there will be moments in our experience when only the one reality remains. It's like when you are doing puja. When you sit for doing puja, you are aware that you are doing puja. You are aware of all the puja articles around you. There is this flowers and sandal paste and fruits and incense, and then there is the deity on the altar. You are aware of all these things. But when I begin doing the puja with faith and devotion and my mind gets completely absorbed into the puja activity, then gradually this sense of that I am doing the puja, that I disappears. And the more I remain focused on the puja itself, everything else will gradually disappear. So even in what seems externally as a dualistic worship, there will be moments. It's not like the entire worship will be a non-dualistic experience. That's not what I'm saying. But when my mind becomes one with that activity, there will be moments when only one entity will remain. As in the case of a bhakta, that entity will be the divine being. In the case of a jnani, these are the kind of distinctions we tend to make, that one entity will be the self. So one could be apparently an objective way of looking at the divine, and the other is a subjective way of looking at the divine. But the subject-object relationship, the subject-object distinction disappears when the mind becomes completely focused. So concentration is from where all experience comes. Given that expressions and expression and descriptions are limited in their ability to convey divine experience, do we need to rely on our own experience to fathom the divine? First of all, the divine can never be fathomed. So, intellectually, we can never understand the divine. Because our intellects are limited, we can only grasp it internally. But yes, experience is the ultimate proof of God's existence. People can quote scriptures, people can quote other people's testimony, but only when I experience the divine myself, then all doubts and all questions will go. So yes, ultimately, the final confirmation about the presence of God is my own experience. But until I get my own experience, I need to rely on something else for me to reach, to get that experience. that is where the importance of Shraddha or faith comes in. And so we have to be vigilant, we have to be careful that the sources I depend on externally, whether it is my guru or the scripture or other textual sources, or I depend on testimony of others, that I make sure that I am depending on trustworthy sources, so that I have not had an experience myself. So I need to then depend on something that I trust. So based on the guidance and instructions and help from trustworthy sources, that's where Shraddha comes in. I then make myself ready and fit to get that experience myself. So the journey begins with faith, but it must end in experience. Swami Vivekananda described it saying that it's good to be born in a church, but not good to die there. Now, what is meant is, church, it obviously didn't mean a building. What is meant is, it's good to begin our spiritual journey in some structure. And that structure is whichever spiritual tradition becomes our home, a spiritual home, that we are able to understand the purpose of life, the goal of life, ideas about the divine, ideas about who I am, in some structure that resonates with me. And luckily for us, there is not just one structure, there are many. So there is the Upanishadic, and the Gita Upanishadic way of understanding it. Then there is the way, for instance, in the Bhagavata, which many Vaishnavas will follow. So that is another way of understanding the same about the purpose of the world, the goal of life, and so on. Then clearly, and then the different religious traditions. There is the different structure in the Islamic tradition, in the Jewish tradition, in the Christian tradition, in the Buddhist tradition. So these are all different structures, different frameworks. And it's good because people are different. We don't all think in the same way. So it's good that if one structure doesn't meet my needs or doesn't resonate with me, I have several others to see and say, yeah, this one will, something else will make sense to me. Now I can hold on to that structure and continue my spiritual journey, and a time will come when I'll directly experience the divine. When I experience the divine, I'm no longer limited to that structure. So all these labels, whether a person is a non-dualist or a dualist, or a person is a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jewish, or all these labels are fine. But once I have a direct experience of that divine, then it really doesn't matter whether the labels remain or don't remain. They can remain, they are not like causing you any trouble, but internally at least the person has outgrown all labels. That's the idea. So ultimately, yes, it's a good question. Our own experience is the ultimate proof of everything. In Hinduism, what is the significance of having thousands of gods and goddesses if the reality is that there is only one Atman? Exactly, that's the whole point. That the reality is one, but the manifestations of that one are many. And the world as we encounter it, the divine as we understand it, is somehow that one appearing as the many. So Srishti, the creation, the projection, is a journey from the one to the many. Now, in order to go from the many to the one, the many have to be resolved back into the one. So all the differences and distinctions I see between one form of the divine and another form of the divine, one way of approaching God in one religion and another way of approaching God in another religion. So there are these differences and distinctions. In some form, in some way, we have to find a way of resolving all these differences and bringing it all into one. So from one we have come to many, and now we have to find a way to go back to that one. And doing our spiritual practice under the guidance of the teacher and the scriptures in a way that makes sense to us, following nothing blindly, using whatever limited intellects that God has given us, using it in the best possible way, we have to find our way through this multiplicity and resolve all the differences and reach that one. Is it possible to do it? Yes, absolutely. Is it easy to do it? That depends. It's like it just won't happen by default. So yes, there is struggle involved. There will be difficulties, but if we are brave, if we are courageous, then we will find. It's a little bit like how many people, we might say, even 500 or 600 or 700 years ago, or even 1,000 years ago, who went to the seashore and saw this vast expanse of the sea. How many people even wondered whether there was anything or anyone on the other side of the sea? Most people probably, when the time when many people thought the earth was just flat. So maybe some people thought this water just continues endlessly. Some people probably didn't pay any thought to it. But some people were like, oh, who knows? Maybe there may be some people or something else, some land on the other side. But only a few had that courage to say, okay, I'm going to now get inside this boat and just go and see if there's something. Maybe many people tried. Maybe they went some distance and like, oh no, there's just water everywhere. And what if I die? And out of fear came back. But then only some rare people who then went, and I mean the names that we read in history, and it's much contested history in many ways, but we hear the name of Christopher Columbus. Now, I know it's very fraught. It's a minefield of bringing up some of these names. But just as an example, here was this one person whose name has become pretty famous, who just said, I'm going to go no matter what, taking all the risk, and then discover something new. So that's how I see it. That there are many people who don't even think about whether there is anything beyond this world, anything transcendent. Some people say there is nothing. Some people say, well, who knows? Some people feel, well, there could be something, but I'm never going to know it. And then there are a few people who say, well, why don't I give it a try? And then they probably then try to do some spiritual practices and try it for a few months, many people just try it for a few days. Some people do it for a few months and they say, oh, I tried and nothing happens, so just waste of time. But then there are a few brave and courageous souls who say, no, I trust that there must be something because this book says it. And I think this book is authentic. Or I have heard some people say it's there, and I trust their word. So that trust, that Shraddha, makes people invest their time and energy into something for which they don't have any immediate proof. So we do begin with Shraddha, we do begin with faith. But ultimately, people who don't give up, people who persevere, they are the ones ultimately will find the truth. How did the rule for counting a japa come about? Did a person make that rule? We don't know, but it seems very ancient. The rule for counting probably I don't know exactly whether you mean the number that is to be counted, that the minimum that is 108 times it has to be done, the way the rosary is turned in order to repeat God's name. Now, we don't know exactly when these rules were made or who made them. What we can be fairly certain about is that very likely there wasn't any committee appointed to make these rules. I'm sure that these evolved over time, and because these instructions came from people who were enlightened, who had experienced God, that is why this tradition, this rule has survived to this day. Because for anything to survive for such a long time, it has to come from a truly authentic, powerful source. And that power, that authenticity, can come only through direct experience with God. So that's how it is seen. That it is not some arbitrary number or an arbitrary way. Somebody just sat one day and said, okay, let's do it that way. I don't think it happened that way. The things go back the same way they came, Srishti, Sthiti, Pralaya, but it seems when it goes back in reverse, you see what you didn't see at first, like the difference in light between dawn and dusk. Is the Kali Yuga like that? What will we see that we didn't see before? I would think that it is better not to prejudge what we are seeing. It is good to keep an open mind and be ready to see what we see, because there is no guarantee that it will be the same blueprint for everyone. Spiritual life, and especially the world of spiritual experience, is so infinite that nobody can say for sure that if you have seen this now, this is the next thing you will see. Then that's the next thing. There is no such way. So better to have an open mind about that. But also, whether from Kali Yuga will go gradually upwards or will go straight to Satya Yuga again, I do not know. But what I do know, or at least what I can suggest, is not to think of these yugas in external terms. Normally when we think about Kali Yuga, the present age, because our all thinking is so much world-based, so to speak, because this seems to be like such a uncontested reality, it's helpful to think of these different yugas as subjective things. That if I'm steeped into worldliness and materialism, I'm in Kali Yuga. But if there is a person next to me who is enlightened, who has experienced God, that person is in Satya Yuga. So we should not think about it in an objective way, that all of us are in the same yuga at the same time. So when contemporaries of Sri Ramakrishna, for instance, I would think that Sri Ramakrishna was in Satya Yuga. And to the extent those around him who are doing their spiritual practices and going nearer and nearer to that truth were in different yugas. And those who are completely steeped into this pursuit of material goals were in this fourth or Kali Yuga. So that's one way of looking at it. Swami Vivekananda once wrote in a letter that from the time Sri Ramakrishna is born, Satya Yuga has started. And that was very puzzling. Then he said, well, the Satya Yuga already started in 1836, then we are already in Satya Yuga. And it seemed to me that the words of Swamiji, so I cannot say, well, that's not right. So what did he exactly mean? And I tried to understand it by thinking that when Sri Ramakrishna is born in my heart, then I will be in Satya Yuga. So it's not that objective birth of someone in Kamarpukur in 1836 that determines when the external yuga will start, but the spiritual birth of Ramakrishna in my heart, then I will go into Satya Yuga. So I don't know what we will see after this Kali Yuga ends, but what I do know is if we can have the vision of our Ishta in the heart, we will be transported into the Satya Yuga. Can we experience both dualism and non-dualism? Nirvikal Samadhi is a non-dualistic experience, and all other gods' experience is a dualistic experience. We cannot experience both at the same time. What I said was, when I am having a vision of God, and while I am having that vision, if I am conscious of the fact I am having the vision of Shiva, then that's a dualistic experience, because in that experience, I am present as much as Shiva is. But when I'm having an experience of Shiva, and I'm not even thinking I am seeing Shiva, then that is non-dualistic in the sense there is nobody other than Shiva in my field of awareness. So that's what I meant by saying non-dualistic means no two. So Shiva alone, not even the sense that I am seeing it. Which is why also when we are meditating, it is helpful to not be aware of the fact that I am meditating. What I mean is that when we are doing japa or meditation, and sometimes it happens that the mind is greatly immersed in doing japa, and naturally when the mind is so focused and immersed, I'm going to experience happiness. There's always that sense of joy and upliftment when the mind gets concentrated. And then the moment then I say, today I'm meditating, so I'm so lucky. Today's meditation is so good. I'm feeling so happy. That experience, that acknowledgement that I am enjoying this meditation is become a dualistic already, because there is I am present there now, because I'm saying I am enjoying it, and in effect the meditation really has come to an end. Because if the meditation means there should be no one in my field of awareness other than my Ishta. But when I'm saying now I'm enjoying that happiness, I'm really thinking of the happiness, and I'm become aware of the fact that I'm enjoying it. So that would be dualistic. But as long as, even in my japa and meditation, there's only my Ishta in my field of awareness, then that is non-dual in the sense that there is nobody else, not even the sense of I, in that experience. Is there a mantra I can use during japa, as I've never received a mantra diksha from a guru? If one wants to undertake a serious spiritual practice, then it is helpful to receive it from a guru. So I think it will be helpful to find a teacher and request a teacher for guidance, and then do as the teacher says. And sometimes this can be a problem in the sense that, say, who am I going to approach? Where am I going to find a teacher? It's always helpful to not rush into these decisions, because we know the kind of times in which we live. There may be many people claiming to be teachers, and we don't want to regret the choices that we make in life. So it's helpful, therefore, to approach a source that is trustworthy, a source that we know is authentic, so that we don't have to regret our things later. So it's good to be careful. It's good to go about a search for a teacher slowly, carefully, mindfully, and once we make a choice, then receive instructions from the teacher. And at all of these stages of search and then practice, we always have to make sure that we don't believe anything blindly, that there is always a chance and a possibility to question everything and accept only what makes sense to us. Always retain a freedom, but also make sure that ultimately whatever choice is made, that we have a full faith in that. Because as we saw, faith is absolutely necessary as we begin the spiritual journey. Eventually, when the faith matures into direct experience, then the faith has done its job. At that point, faith is not even so much needed when you have directly experienced God. But until that time, faith is a great support and a great help. How does Vedanta view the genocidal atrocities that have occurred throughout history? The vision of Arjuna or something else? I don't think there is only one standard Vedanta answer to that question. There are terrible things happening in the world, terrible things have happened throughout history, and terrible things are happening right now in the contemporary world that we live. So how we view what is happening around us, how we react to it, what are our duties related to that, I don't think there is going to be one answer to that, because the answer will very much depend on what I see as my purpose in life, what I see are my duties in life, what I see is how and the best way I can respond to it. In general, I can say is that wherever we see atrocities, every one of us should try as best we can, in whichever way possible, to try to remove pain and suffering, to remove injustice, to restore justice and restore equality. We may not always succeed. Our efforts may not always be perfect, but the sincerity with which we approach that is what is most important. And as I said, even as there are atrocities going on, there are also people. It's not just terrible things are happening. Good things are also happening. This is what the world is. It's a mixture of good and bad. Sometimes it might seem as if the good is more and bad is less, and sometimes it might be just the opposite. But no matter how and what the state of the world is, a Vedanta student would say, to the extent it is possible for me, I will do everything to remove suffering, to bring happiness to people. That's the way I would look at it myself. So that brings us to the end of today's class. Thank you for all your reflections and questions. So, some very good ways. There are some of the ideas that come up, and it's very enlightening to see that we look at these ideas from different angles, and it helps us understand the subject in a better way. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.